Okay, let's take a question from Andrew Wickham. One of my friends has gotten into health and wealth preaching. How should I proceed?
Well, I have a simple, quick workaround on that issue. And it's not exactly a series of questions, it's a series of statements. But it could be turned into a series of questions, I guess. So Andrew could say to his friend, what was the circumstances that when the writer of Hebrews, of the Christians that the writer of Hebrews was writing to? Oh, I don't know. The writer of Hebrews was writing to persecuted Christians. What was the circumstance of the Thessalonians? I don't know. First Thessalonians was written to persecuted Christians, along with Second Thessalonians written to persecuted Christians. What was the circumstance of the Christians Peter was writing to in First Peter? I don't know. Peter was writing to persecuted Christians. Paul wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and at least 2 Timothy while he was in prison. Did you know that? No, or you might ask the question, what were Paul's circumstances when he wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and 2 Timothy? I don't know. He was in prison. So if Hebrews was written to suffering Christians, if both Thessalonians was written to suffering Christians, if First Peter was written to Thessalonians, and I think also Philippians, and Paul was writing all these letters from prison, where do you get the prosperity gospel from that? Were these all bad Christians, including Paul? Now, to me, that's just an end around. So you don't straining at individual verses and all this other stuff. But just look, it's like they're straining at an ant and swallowing the camel. The camel is the condition of all the churches and all the Christians in the first couple centuries, all the way up until the time of Constantine, on and off terrible persecutions. Constantine was the beginning of the 4th century, and Constantine didn't make Christianity the state religion. That didn't come for another 50 years. That made Christianity a legal religion, so Christians were no longer persecuted. So our first 4 centuries of Christianity, Christians were characteristically suffering lots of persecution, lots of hardship, there was no health, wealth, and prosperity going on for them. Why? Were these Christians bad Christians? I mean, I don't know. To me, this is the end of QED. You know, it's over with. Mm-hmm. It's so obvious. You don't have to be a theologian and go after all these little verses, because all these Christians knew these verses. Paul knew these verses. Jesus said, in this world you have tribulation. Now, I've overcome the world, but that statement doesn't obviously lead to health, wealth, and prosperity, because if that were the case, Jesus wouldn't have warned them about the tribulation that's coming and offered the encouragement that essentially in the midst of your tribulation, I will help you overcome. You know, so I think of 2 Corinthians, the thorn in the flesh, and when Paul's weak, then he's strong. You know, it's
throughout the whole New Testament.
Everywhere.
It's hard to believe they're reading the New Testament when it's so integral to this. I was thinking, I've been reading in Isaiah, and I keep seeing in the part I'm in right now, Isaiah keeps saying, you know, don't be afraid of them, because in the end, God wins and they will be destroyed. So he's not saying, I'm going to make everything better right this second. He's saying, your hope is in God's ultimate victory. Mm-hmm. Peter gives the same exact advice in 1 Peter. He doesn't say, oh, well, you're suffering and God's going to fix it all for you when you ask him and you have enough faith. No, he says, in the end, you will have victory with Jesus. So don't fear those. In fact, he quotes Isaiah in that part, but don't fear those, don't fear men, fear God, because he's the one who wins in the end. And he's the one who you want to hitch your wagon to.
Right. And in fact, in chapter 5 there, he says, and the same experiences of suffering are being had by your brethren who are in the world.
Right.
You
cannot read 1 Peter without seeing that God is working through the suffering and he has specific purposes for it. So similar to the question I asked in the last one, I think what you might want to ask is which do you value more? Do you value God? Do you want to know God? Or do you want the wealth and prosperity that God can give you? Are you using God as a tool to get something else? In which case he's going to let you down if he doesn't do it? Or is your goal God, and would you be willing to suffer if he asked you to? I think that if they need to think about that. They need to think about, if they are seeking God or they're seeking wealth and using God as a tool. And hopefully that can lead to other conversations about, what Peter says and whether or not the New Testament is right, that God is worth going through suffering for knowing him and being with him in the end.
Paul says in Romans 8, I do not consider the sufferings in this life to bear any comparison to the glories that are to follow. So notice how he's acknowledging the reality of suffering in this life, and the payoff is later. He also says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory. Now keep in mind the momentary light. Paul's affliction in human terms were neither momentary nor light. And later in the book, he talks about being whipped 4 times, 39 lashes. He was beaten with rods twice or 3 times. He was stoned in Lystra, left for dead. He was shipwrecked twice. All kinds of hard things happen. Trouble here, trouble there. He goes on with this litany of difficulties he's facing. This is the great Apostle Paul. Did he adhere to this prosperity gospel?
No. And one last thing, God does not look kindly on people who use him as a tool to get something else.
That's right.
And you can see this in Isaiah too, because the people were trying to do certain rituals in order to get God to do things for
Manipulate.
them. And God was saying, your heart is not with me.
Right.
I hate the things you're doing because you're trying to manipulate me with your rituals. So I would also warn him, if that's what you're doing, that is really dangerous.
Yeah, and that's the pagan response. In animism, spirit worship, whatever, or spiritism, it's all about manipulating circumstances so you can beat the demons at their own game, basically. It's all about manipulation. And the same thing was true about the pagan ancient Near Eastern religions. It was manipulating these gods in different ways through a certain series of sacrifices or a certain kind of sympathetic magic where they were having sex up at the high places so they would the crops would reproduce better, the Astra, all of that. It's all manipulation. And so when the Jews began doing all of this kind of stuff, that's when God just put his foot down. That's not me. You're not going to manipulate me. But the health, wealth, prosperity, the word faith movement is completely about manipulating the circumstances and baptizing it with spiritual language.